The headlines scream, diplomatic breakthrough, but if you listen to what wasn't said at the latest NATO summit, you'll hear something far more dangerous. No exit strategy, no timeline for peace, no clear definition of victory. And that silence isn't accidental. It's strategic, because what looks like stalemate on the surface might actually be America's most calculated gamble in decades. Tonight we're going to expose the hidden architecture of what military analysts are calling the forever proxy. A conflict designed not to end quickly, but to drain America's rivals, while strengthening its own position. But here's the terrifying part. This strategy only works if it doesn't spiral out of control. And right now, we're seeing signs that it might be doing exactly that. The question isn't whether World War III is coming. The question is whether America's decision-makers understand they're playing with fire that could consume everything, including their own carefully laid plans. Let me show you what's really happening behind the diplomatic theater. According to defense spending reports from the Pentagon, U.S. military aid to Ukraine has now exceeded $120 billion. But here's what they don't tell you. Less than 30% of that money actually leaves American soil. Defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, companies that have seen their stock prices soar by over 40% since the conflict began. This isn't charity, this is business. And when war becomes a business model, the incentive to end it quickly disappears. But follow the money deeper, and you'll find something even more revealing. According to a Reuters analysis, European nations have collectively spent over $200 billion on emergency energy alternatives since cutting Russian supplies. Where did that money go? Largely to American liquefied natural gas companies and Middle Eastern suppliers willing to work with Washington. Think about it. Russia loses its European energy market. Europe becomes dependent on American and allied suppliers. American defense companies get the largest weapons orders in their history. And all of this happens while China watches its main strategic partner, Russia, get systematically weakened. From Washington's perspective, this looks like a masterpiece of strategic planning. Weaken your main rival, strengthen your own economy, bind your allies closer to you through dependency, and do it all while maintaining the moral high ground of supporting democracy. But here's where the trap becomes a double-edged sword. This strategy only works if Russia stays predictable. If Moscow follows the script and slowly bleeds resources while avoiding escalation, the moment Putin decides the cost of playing America's game is too high, everything changes. And we're already seeing signs that Russia is changing its playbook. Just last week, intelligence reports confirmed by the BBC showed Russian military advisors arriving in Iran, helping Tehran accelerate its missile program. North Korea has reportedly shipped over 3 million artillery shells to Russia, with more coming monthly. China, despite public neutrality, has increased its purchase of Russian energy by 40%, providing Moscow with a crucial financial lifeline. Do you see what's happening? America's strategy assumed Russia would fight this war alone, gradually exhausting its resources. Instead, Moscow is building what intelligence analysts call an axis of resistance, a coalition of nations that all share one common interest: breaking American global dominance. This is the hidden trap. America designed a conflict to weaken Russia, but Russia is using that same conflict to unite America's enemies and test the limits of Western resolve. The question now is simple: who springs their trap first? The signs are already there if you know where to look, and they're not coming from the obvious places. While everyone watches the front lines in Ukraine, the real escalation is happening in spaces most Americans never think about until it's too late. Let's start with something that should terrify every American: our satellite. According to Space Force intelligence reports confirmed by Defense News, Russian inspector satellites have been maneuvering closer to U.S. military and commercial satellites over the past 6 months. These aren't coincidences. Think about what happens if GPS goes down for even 12 hours. No ATM transactions, no credit card processing, air traffic control systems failing, emergency services blinded, supply chains grinding to a halt. This isn't speculation. It's exactly what happened during the 2021 GPS jamming incidents in the Eastern Mediterranean, except that was just a test run. Russia has already demonstrated it can disable entire satellite networks. In March, they jammed GPS signals across Finland and Estonia during NATO exercises, forcing civilian aircraft to make emergency landings. The message was clear: we can turn off your technology whenever we want. But space is just the opening act. The real escalation is happening beneath the ocean, where 95% of global internet traffic travels through undersea cables. According to NATO maritime intelligence, Russian submarines have been detected near critical cable junctions, connecting North America to Europe. Not just once or twice, this is systematic mapping of our digital lifelines. Remember the Nord Stream pipeline explosions? Whoever was responsible demonstrated something crucial: underwater infrastructure is incredibly vulnerable. Now imagine that same capability applied to the cables that carry your bank transactions, your phone calls, your entire digital life. One coordinated strike could isolate America from its allies faster than any military blockade. Here's what makes this truly dangerous. These aren't acts of war in the traditional sense. Satellite interference can be blamed on solar storms. Cable accidents happen all the time. Cyber attacks get attributed to criminal groups. Russia has perfected the art of aggressive action without triggering Article 5 of the NATO Charter. And they're not stopping there. Intelligence sources reported by the Wall Street Journal reveal that Russian military contractors are now operating in at least 12 African countries, training local forces and securing access to critical mineral deposits: lithium for batteries, rare earth elements for electronics, cobalt for electric vehicles, resources America desperately needs for its green energy transition. Do you see the pattern? While America focuses on conventional military aid, Russia is quietly positioning itself to control the resources and infrastructure that power modern civilization. They're not just planning to win a war. They're planning to win the peace that comes after. But here's the most chilling part. US intelligence knows all of this is happening. The question is whether American leaders are prepared to escalate in response, or if they're going to wait until it's too late to act without triggering the very global conflict they're trying to avoid. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to discuss. This war has become too profitable to end quickly. And I'm not just talking about defense contractors, though Lockheed Martin's recent $7.1 billion contract extension tells that story clearly enough. I'm talking about a complete economic ecosystem that now depends on permanent crisis. Let's follow the money, because money doesn't lie. According to Bloomberg analysis, global defense spending hit $2.4 trillion in 2024. But here's what's really telling. 40% of that increase came from countries not directly involved in any conflict. Nations are arming themselves not for wars they're fighting, but for wars they expect to fight. That creates a feedback loop. More weapons sales mean more regional tensions. More tensions justify more weapons purchases. And somewhere in the middle, ordinary people pay the price through inflation, higher taxes, and resources diverted from healthcare, education, and infrastructure. But the defense industry is just the tip of the iceberg. Energy companies have made historic profits from the chaos. According to Financial Times reporting, major oil companies saw profit margins increase by an average of 35% since the conflict began. Not because of increased production, but because of increased uncertainty. Fear sells for a premium. Meanwhile, American LNG exports to Europe have tripled, creating a $50 billion annual market that simply didn't exist 3 years ago. European nations, desperate to replace Russian energy, sign 20-year contracts at prices that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. Those contracts don't disappear if peace breaks out tomorrow. They become sunk costs that nobody wants to explain to their taxpayers. Think about the incentives this creates. Every month of continued conflict means another month of premium energy prices, another month of weapons orders, another month of justifying massive government spending that flows directly to well-connected industries. And here's where it gets really cynical. The longer this drags on, the more normal it becomes. Remember when $50 billion in aid was shocking? Now it barely makes headline. What used to be emergency spending has become baseline budgets. The crisis economy has become the actual economy. But Russia isn't just a victim in this economic war. They're active participant. According to Reuters analysis, Moscow has actually increased its defense spending by 60% since 2022, but they're doing something clever. Instead of just buying weapons, they're building weapons factories. Instead of importing technology, they're developing domestic alternative. China is playing the same long game. While American defense contractors celebrate quarterly profits, Chinese manufacturers are quietly capturing market share in semiconductors, rare earth processing, and renewable energy technology. They're using America's focus on military spending to leapfrog ahead in civilian technologies that will matter more in 2030 than who won some battle in Ukraine in 2024. So ask yourself, if peace broke out tomorrow, who would actually benefit, and who has invested too much in conflict to let it end easily? Here's what every American needs to understand. You're not just watching this crisis unfold, you're paying for it, and you'll be living with the consequences long after the headlines move on to something else. Let's make this personal. That $120 billion in Ukraine aid, that's roughly 360s for every man, woman, and child in America. But it's not a one-time cost. According to Congressional Budget Office projections, the total commitment, including loan guarantees, reconstruction promises, and long-term security arrangements, could exceed $500 billion over the next decade. That's $1,500 per American, whether you support the policy or not, and that's just the direct costs. The indirect costs are already hitting your wallet every day. Food prices have risen 23% since the conflict began, partly due to disrupted grain exports and fertilizer shortages. Energy costs remain 18% above pre-crisis levels despite recent decreases. Your grocery bill and gas tank are already casualties of geopolitical strategy. But money is just the beginning. If this crisis escalates into direct confrontation, your daily life changes overnight. Remember those satellite vulnerabilities we discussed? Your GPS stops working, affecting everything from ride-sharing apps to emergency services. Those undersea cable networks, your internet slows to a crawl, online banking becomes unreliable, and remote work becomes impossible. Here's what really should concern you. America's strategic reserves are being depleted. We've sent so many weapons systems overseas that our own military stockpiles are at critically low levels. According to Defense Department assessments reported by Politico, it would take 3 to 5 years to rebuild our missile inventory to pre-2022 levels. That's not just a number. That's America's ability to defend itself if multiple crises emerge simultaneously. And multiple crises are exactly what our adversaries are planning. While America focuses on Europe, China continues its military buildup around Taiwan. Iran accelerates its nuclear program. North Korea expands its missile capability. Russia may be engaged in Ukraine, but its allies are using the distraction to advance their own strategic objectives. So what can you actually do about this? First, understand that this isn't about taking sides in foreign policy debate. This is about recognizing that your government is making bets with your money and your security bets that may not pay off the way they expect. Stay informed but stay skeptical. When politicians promise quick victories or easy solutions, Remember the economic incentives we've discussed. When media outlets push for more intervention or immediate peace deals, ask who benefits from those outcomes. Most importantly, prepare for a world where crisis becomes the new normal. Build some financial reserves, because inflation and supply chain disruptions are likely to continue. Develop basic emergency preparations, because infrastructure failures are becoming more common. And maintain perspective, because the goal of both propaganda and fear-mongering is to make you react emotionally, instead of thinking clearly. The choice isn't between war and peace. It's between understanding what's really happening and being manipulated by those who profit from your confusion. If this analysis helped you see through the headlines to the deeper patterns, hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because in a world full of traps, the most dangerous one is not knowing they exist.